Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We're at opening day for the 2041 season, and our Buffalo Wings got off to a good start. 8-5 victory over Philadelphia, and we had 5 solo home runs in the game. So, a good start for our offense, which hasn't tended to be as good as our pitching over the last, decade or so. That said, we've still made the playoffs for 13 consecutive years, trying to make it a 14th year in a row this season. And a 1-0 start is certainly a better way to do that than an 0-1 start. Have a few things that are going to be happening over the next few days. We like our 26-man roster as the season begins, but we have put in a waiver claim for a left-handed pitcher that we should hear about shortly. And we also have 2 players in the young second baseman Alejandro Contreras and the young center fielder Tylen Hotaling, who are beginning this season on the injured list. But in the case of Contreras, we'll certainly be getting a spot on the 26-man roster when he's healthy. And in the case of Hotaling, may very well be getting a spot on the 26-man roster when he's healthy. So we've got a few decisions that we'll likely be making over the next few weeks as the season gets underway. And our waiver claim for the left-handed pitcher, Sean Drawn, went through, and I think he's someone who could definitely help us. We don't have an obvious hole on our 26-man roster, but Drawn, the 31-year-old, has certainly been an above-average pitcher over the course of his career with a 1.26 ERA plus and an 88 FIP minus. He's a one-time All-Star back in 2036, and he is, as we touched upon at the end of our last episode, someone who's more effective against left-handed batters than right-handed batters. So we are going to look to move on from Mike Waters, a longtime reliever for us, but at this point is probably the worst or the next to worst right-handed arm in our bullpen. He's a guy who's out of his minimum pay years, and he's a guy who we didn't send down right at the end of spring training because he's out of options at this point. But we have gone ahead and shopped him around, and we can get another right-handed reliever, Pat Cheek, in return. Cheek's profile is honestly quite similar to Waters. He's making less this year, but he has been a closer over the last year with the Rangers, and his salary is expected to be almost $2.9 million next year. So he's going to be making more than Waters a year from now, but we will save some money this year. And the only negative thing about Cheek is that he does have some negative personality traits with the greed, the low leadership, and the low loyalty. But he throws harder than Waters, he's got more stamina than Waters, and he's durable. As good as Waters has been for us, and you can see his ratings profile is very similar, doesn't throw quite as hard, but over the course of Waters' career, and granted it's only 177 and 2/3 innings over 6 seasons, 6+ seasons at this point, because our bullpen is just so deep and good that the 7th or 8th guy out of our bullpen, which Waters has typically been, doesn't get a lot of playing time. But he's still struck out a batter per inning with a 2.33 ERA, a ridiculous 1.75 ERA plus over the course of his career. But the deciding factor is we get a younger pitcher, a similar pitcher in Pat Cheek, and Cheek still has an option year left. So as good as he is, we probably are going to stash him in AAA for a while to enable us to put Drawn back on the roster. So it looks like Texas will do this trade. We'll try to get, even if it's just a little bit of money, every little bit that we can get helps. So we're going to try to get a little more money out of the deal from them. And then we will send Cheek to AAA, and that'll open up the spot on our 26-man roster for Drawn, which will give us a third left-hander out of our bullpen. And the other move that we've made is we've signed Pierce George to a minor league contract. A 37-year-old veteran doesn't sound all that exciting. And even when we look at his ratings at this point, he's a 37, soon to be 38-year-old who's fragile physically. But he is a 4-time Cy Young Award winner, and he had lingered on the market for an extended period of time. He actually won his 4th Cy Young Award just 2 seasons ago in 2039 when he was 16-1, led the league in wins, strikeouts, and ERA. But he really kind of fell off the map last year, was 1-8 with a 5.12 ERA, had some injuries, and looking at his ratings at this point, it seems like he's just a guy who has very rapidly deteriorated. You can see we thought his stuff was still an 80 at the end of his Cy Young Award season a year and a half ago, and we think it's a 50 now. He's lost a little bit of velocity. We're going to put him in AAA. Think that he could certainly be some organizational depth for us there. Don't know that he's going to end up pitching for us at the major league level, but certainly kind of a nice treat to have a 4-time Cy Young Award winner as depth down in AAA, even if he's not what he once was. And we're off to a little bit of a slow start at 2-3, so we've lost 3 out of 4 after that opening day victory. The center fielder Tylen Hotaling is healthy now, although I feel we could ultimately use another left-handed bat. I'm honestly not sure that I would get Hotaling into the starting lineup against right-handed pitching quite yet. We'd have to take out someone right in the middle of our order, open up a spot for him in the outfield. It would be the young center fielder Ishmael Velasco, who we really like. The also left-handed hitting Luis Comaduran, the also left-handed hitting Mike Broaden, or Juan Romero, who's led our team in homers and ribbies each of the last couple of seasons. So there's just not a spot for him. If he was capable of playing third base, we could shift Seifu back to second and get a Mike Whitehead out of the lineup. But unfortunately, Tylen Hotaling is a slightly above average, perhaps defensive outfielder with no ability at all to play anywhere in the infield. So we're actually going to send him down to AAA so he can at least play every day. He's pretty fully developed at this point, at least according to our scout, as a 25-year-old. We think his eye could get a little better. Hit 300 last year with 33 homers and 97 ribbies in AAA Albany. So he's definitely great depth for us to have. Certainly, if we end up back in the playoffs, we typically move from a 13 pitcher, 13 position player roster to 12 pitchers and 14 position players. And a good left-handed bat like Hotaling might have a better chance of being on our postseason roster than he actually does on our regular season roster. We'll see how things go. If midway through the season we're struggling to score runs and we're out of the playoffs if the season were to be over, that might encourage us to make some changes to get another left-handed bat up at the major league level. I tend to think when all is said and done, we'll end up in the playoffs this season without a lot of problems, which might allow us to be a little creative with what we do with Mr. Hotaling. But for the time being, he's going to end up down in AAA, playing every day there. If we do have some injuries in the outfield or ineffectiveness or decide that it's time to move on from someone and trade someone away, then he could get an opportunity back in the majors sooner rather than later. And it may take a little longer here on April 9th with a 4-3 record for us to make the last decision that I felt like we had in front of us in the short to medium term, as the young infielder Alejandro Contreras not returning or not healing as quickly as possible from that strained ab. So could still be another couple of weeks before he's ready to come back up. Given that he's been out since very early in spring training on March 3rd, we're probably actually going to even send him on a rehab assignment for a couple days at least when all is said and done. So probably going to be more towards the end of April when we see Contreras back in the major leagues. And after that 2-3 start, we put 8 straight wins together. So the Wings stand at 10-3 here on Tax Day, April 15th, 2041. Viewed as the number 1 team in baseball in terms of the power rankings. A couple guys that we followed over the years in the news. Shamar Jenneret, our, I don't want to say longtime superstar, but a 3-year superstar for us in the middle of our batting order back when we won 2 championships in 3 years. Just got his 2000th hit for the Red Sox. And Jorge Rente, who you may remember is a young prospect that we were very high on, going to be headed to the injured list for about 4 months. Rente is an international free agent that we were very interested in several years ago. We've been following his career. Profile certainly looks like he still could be a very good major league pitcher, but he's going to be recovering from that surgery to remove bone chips in his elbow. He'll be turning 22 while he's injured. He is finally pitching in AAA this year, where he was 1-0 with a 3.86 ERA for the Expos organization. And we've won another game, 9 in a row now to go to 11-3, and it looks like Contreras is now healthy, so he may have healed up a little quicker than we had anticipated when our medical staff told us that they thought he might be a little bit delayed. As I mentioned, he's been banged up for a month and a half now, since the 3rd of March, so we're probably going to at least give him the rest of this week in AAA to hopefully shake off a little rust and get himself ready to join us in the major leagues within the next 4 or 5 days, hopefully. And we just continue winning 14 straight wins at this point to run our record to 16-3. Part of me wants to bring Contreras up. He's played 4 games, which is probably enough to shake off the rust. Only 2 for 12 down there with 7 strikeouts in his 12 at-bats, though. So seems like he could maybe use a little more time. And the guy that we were going to likely send down for him, the rookie Mike Whitehead, is playing pretty regularly for us since we have him in the starting lineup against right-handed pitching, and he's hitting .357 in 56 at-bats. It's a very small sample size, certainly, and he's probably not going to continue to have a BABIP of over 400, but I don't think there's any real need to rush him back. Seifu also hitting over 300, and even the shortstop Jim Andrews has a .314 average, even though we don't view him as a big-time offensive player. So the team is playing incredibly well. Don't see any reason to rush Contreras up, given how well the guys whose spots he might be taking are hitting. Could make an argument that maybe we send the veteran Teagan Tiley down. He does have 1 option year left, but he's hitting .250 as a utility infielder for us. I think we would rather at this point ensure that the 25-year-old Andrews, the 23-year-old Whitehead, and the 25-year-old Contreras all play every day. And the only way that's going to happen is if one of them is in the minors. I think certainly at some point over the next week or two, Whitehead will likely cool off a bit. And at that point, Contreras will probably be back up in the majors, and it will likely be back up in the majors for good for Mr. Contreras at that point. And we did finally lose a couple games over the past week. The long winning streak ended at 15 games. 20-5 is our record right now, though, so still an 800 winning percentage as we head into the final days of April. And Mr. Rojas, Daniel Rojas, our big free agent acquisition, was the National League Player of the Week last week. 9 for 25 with 4 homers and 8 ribbies. For the year, he's got a 295 average, 6 homers and 17 ribbies. So not a bad start to his career in Buffalo. And Contreras is hitting better in AAA. He's got the batting average up to 257, but he's still struck out 19 times in 35 at-bats. And honestly, he struck out 88 times in 220 at-bats last year at AAA for us. You look at his avoid K ratings, we think he can get a little better there, and we still think he can get better in terms of his contact, his gap power, and his home run power. He's also a guy, since he's only been in our organization for a little over a season at this point, that we're trying to get him as versatile as possible defensively. He wasn't necessarily trained as aggressively to play multiple positions in the Houston organization as we've tried to make him over the year plus that we've had him. Given that we're playing 800 baseball without him, I think we're going to keep him in AAA for the time being and just get him as trained up to be as versatile and as prepped defensively as he possibly can be to play all of those infield positions. Kind of similar to Tylin Ho-tailing. I think when we get to the playoffs, Contreras will certainly be on the playoff roster, and he'll certainly be up in Buffalo at some time before September. I can almost guarantee it. But I don't see a need to rush him. But if and when we are in the playoffs, he could certainly take the spot of Tegan Tiley and probably slide right into the starting lineup over a Whitehead or an Andrus. But there's no need to have all 3 of those guys who are still developing to some extent up in the majors at this point. And with Whitehead dipping a bit, but it's still hitting 297 on the year, and Andrus still hitting 298 on the year, even though they've been a little less effective over the last week or so. The team is still playing real well, and if we avoid the clock a little bit more on eventual arbitration for Contreras, it's not the end of the world. But I think that in terms of avoiding strikeouts, that's an area that he can get better at. I mean, at this point, I mentioned he struck out more than half of his at-bats in AAA this year, and he struck out 12 times in 34 at-bats in the major league level last year. And his BABIP this year is over 500 in AAA. Now, granted, part of that is because he only has 16 at-bats where he hasn't struck out, and he's got 9 hits in those, so all those strikeouts are going to kind of lead to some weird numbers there when he's still putting up a decent season with a 108 WRC+, but certainly expect that he'll get less lucky going forward with that BABIP. And we just don't need him in the majors right now, which is a weird thing to say given that he's kind of a cornerstone player for our team, in my belief. But we've got such depth, and we're playing so well that he's going to be down in AAA for a while unless we have some injuries. And with the first month of the season in the books, the Buffalo Wings are, for a team that wasn't projected to make the playoffs by the experts this year, inexplicably at 21-5, on pace to exceed the ridiculous 118 wins we had in the regular season a year ago. You can see the left-handed hitting Mike Broaden, a guy who we've been waiting to bust out for the 3+ years that we've had him, leading the NL with a 392 average, second in OPS, second in batter WAR. He's also got a 15-game hitting streak going. Deshaun Seifu with 18 steals. Looks like he's got a chance to lead the league in steals for a 14th consecutive year, hitting 330 through the first month of the season. The rookie Jim Lance, our number 5 starter, 4-0 with a league best 0.92 ERA. Our ace Alexis Barajas is 3-0 with a 3.03 ERA and ranks 3rd in the National League in pitcher WAR. The youngster Jim Lance also was just named the NL Rookie of the Month, not surprisingly, after going 4-0 with a league best ERA through the first month of the season. So everything is going incredibly well for the Buffalo Wings at this point, which gives us a lot of ability to be really patient with some of those guys like Hotaling and Contreras, as long as we have the 26-man roster that we want for the playoffs. Really doesn't matter if some of those guys get playing time in AAA or the majors, as long as they're playing regularly to continue their development moving in the right direction. And taking a quick look at our pitching, you can see that, interestingly, the left-hander Shane Drawn, who we picked up on waivers, is the one guy who's had a brutal year among our bullpen, a 12.38 ERA over 8 innings pitched. So certainly hasn't been real effective, but 8 innings pitched is a pretty small sample size. We mentioned how good Lance was doing, and when we look at Lance compared to another one of our young pitchers, Eric Barbarito, Lance, with that incredible movement on his pitches, is just a higher end guy. So we're actually going to promote Lance to the 4th spot in the rotation over Barbarito, who's been struggling a bit this year after a real great second full season in the majors for him last year. Not a huge issue, but think that Lance looks like he's got potential to be a front end of the rotation type of starter over the next few years. So want to ensure that he gets as much action as possible. Interestingly, when you look at our starting rotation at this point, you can see that we've got a combined record of 14-1 for our starting pitchers. Only Barbarito is not undefeated in terms of the decisions he's been part of thus far in this great start to 2041. And we've made it to mid-May now, 27-10 record, which means we've cooled off a little bit over the last week and a half or so. Did just have our big free agent acquisition, Daniel Rojas, just hit the 300th homer of his career. His batting average has dipped to 246, does have 8 homers and 21 ribbies in the relatively early going for us. 118 WRC plus is not quite what we were looking for $30 million a year, but looking at his history and his batting profile, tend to think we'll get even more offense out of him over the coming months than we have over the first month and a half of this season. And we finally got the opening to bring up Mr. Contreras, and I know that I had mentioned that we wanted to ensure that Mr. Contreras, as well as the young shortstop Andrus and second baseman Whitehead, would all be playing every day. And we may not be able to do that perfectly because they're all going to end up on the major league team. But the utility infielder Tegan Tiley is got a strained quad day-to-day, but he's going to be day-to-day for 4 to 5 weeks. Just seems like something that we want to get healed. Not that he is a critically important player to us, but has hit 276 and 58 at-bats as a utility player for us. Can play a number of positions around the infield. As I mentioned, he's of those 4 infielders that I've been talking about, the one who's least likely to actually end up on the postseason roster. But for the time being, we're going to use the injury to Tiley to put him on the IL, which hopefully will let him heal faster than the 4 to 5 weeks. And that'll give us the opportunity to get young Mr. Contreras back up to the majors. Batting average at 267, does have 5 homers and 23 ribbies and 120 at-bats. Still has struck out 48 times. You can see still has a lot of work to do in terms of avoiding strikeouts, but he's been an above-average offensive player in AAA. There's no reason to not get him back up into the majors for the time being. And we've made it to the month of June, another good month for the Buffalo Wings, but we have certainly fallen off of the torrid pace that we were putting forth in April. 704 winning percentage, 38-16, 9 games up on the Marlins in the NL East, but only 1 game up on the Padres for the best record in the National League and the best record in baseball. Deshaun Seifu, with 30 steals through the first 2 months of the season, looks still well on his way to leading the league for a 14th consecutive year in that category. The young outfielder Ishmael Velasco ranks second in the league in OPS at this point and third in the league in batter WAR. And the young pitcher Jim Lance ranks second in ERA. So between Lance and Velasco, we've got a couple of rookies who are doing some great things. Because after Lance won the National League Rookie of the Month in April, Velasco wins the National League Rookie of the Month for May, hitting .380 with 8 homers and 20 ribbies. Even better than that, Velasco was also named the National League Batter of the Month for May with that great season. .330 average, 15 homers, and 38 ribbies. Velasco, an international free agent signing of ours from 2034, off to an incredible start here in his first full major league season with a 175 WRC plus here on June 1st. Taking a look at our team statistics here 2 months into the season. Our 38-16 record is 1 better than Pythagorean expectations. We are 5-0 in extra inning games, so perhaps a little bit lucky there. 32-11 against righties, only 6-5 against left-handed pitching, so that may be an issue that comes back to haunt us in the playoffs. But after having an offense that had struggled in recent years, changes we made in the offseason, most notably bringing on Rojas, but also I think investing heavily in our farm system over recent years and some of the investments we've made in trading for outfielders and infielders finally paying off. As you can see, we are first in almost every offensive category in the National League, including tied for first with 76 home runs, second in the NL with 295 runs scored. We're also second in the NL in terms of runs allowed with 191 allowed, and you can see we are first, second, or third in every pitching category. Also ranked second in defensive efficiency and zone rating, first in the National League in stolen bases, as we often are, thanks primarily to Seifu. But our base running is actually the worst in the National League. But an incredibly well-balanced start to the season for the Wings, as I said, ranking second in the NL in both runs scored and runs allowed, and a plus 104 run differential, only 54 games into the season. So we're outscoring our opponents by almost 2 runs a game. And in the month of June, the Buffalo Wings have played fine, but not as well as we were the first couple months of the season. You can see our records dipped to 47-24, 662 winning percentage, puts us half a game behind the Guardians for the best record in baseball. Our lead over the Marlins in the National League has been cut to 6.5 games. Mike Broaden, third in the NL with a .341 batting average. Seifu with 40 steals is running away with the NL title and looks like he could very well lead the league in majors and stolen bases this year. Alexis Barajas, our ace, third in the National League with 8 wins. So still have some important players high on the leaderboards, but definitely not playing as well as we had been through that ridiculous start and long winning streak we had during the month of April. And here on the first day of June, or the first day of summer, not the first day of June, June 21st, check in on our minor league system, and you can see that we've slipped to 13th out of 32 overall. Only 2 top 100 prospects at this point in Juan Toledo and Chris Lott, who are both pretty far away from the majors. That's really driven by the maturity of players like Contreras and Jim Lance, who had been on our top prospect list, to becoming major leaguers rather than prospects. One fortunate piece of information that I wanted to share was Ken Pearson, a 11th round catching prospect that we picked in 2036, has really had some dramatic improvement all of a sudden. We promoted him from A ball, where he was hitting 283, to high A ball about a week ago, where he's struggling. But taking a look at his scouting report, this is a guy who has definitely, over the last year, improved his contact, his power, and particularly his eye considerably, while also improving the level of his defense. Still doesn't necessarily look like anything other than a potential replacement level backup catcher with good defense at the major league level. But for an 11th round pick, can't say that we're disappointed that at 23 years old, he finally seems to be figuring things out a bit in the lower levels of the minors. And in theory, he's ready for another promotion, but we'll probably keep him in single A a bit longer. But with the farm system being rated lower, being on June 21st, is an important opportunity for us to reload our system, because it's time for the first year player draft. And after that great regular season a year ago, we won't be picking until the end of the first round at number 33 overall, despite the fact that we choked it in the playoffs. It's based on the regular season, so we're going to be at the end of the first round. But the thing that we do have going for us now is that we've also got the 4th and the 6th picks in the supplemental first round selection. So although we're not going to be picking until number 33, we're also going to have picks at number 37 and 39. So 3 top 40 picks for us this year should be a nice opportunity for us to replenish our system, boosted by those compensatory picks we got when Steve Anderson and Daniel Meza left us as free agents this past offseason. And as the draft gets going, a lot of incredible players out there, notably Pat Moody, a 22-year-old out of Texas, left-handed hitter who looks like he is ready to start mashing major league pitching right now as an outfielder. Certainly will not be available when we're picking at 33rd in the draft, but he's going to be a very high ceiling, high floor player for some team to draft in the early stages. Since we're not going until 33rd, we're just going to sim right away to our pick and then finish up the episode after we look at some of the top prospects that are still on the board. Because although we won't be picking to 33rd, when that 33rd pick does come up, we're going to have 3 of the next 7 picks. So the players who are left on the board, we're going to have an opportunity to likely grab 3 of the top prospects available when we get to our pick. So we'll auto draft right the way to that 33rd pick and take a look at some of the top prospects who are still available for us. Before we do that, though, let's just see the draft log. And not surprisingly, Pat Moody went 3rd overall to the Kansas City Royals. And if they can get him signed, it's not going to shock me to see him go right from college into the majors. Start out taking a look at some of the pitchers who are available, and at least as far as their upside potential, there's certainly three that our scout is most interested in. The one 5-star prospect left is the reliever John Wisniewski. He certainly looks like he could be a good one. The 18-year-old left-hander is committed to Augustana College, which I believe was a Division II or Division III college football powerhouse back in the 80s or 90s. Looks like his stuff, movement, and control could all be excellent. His fastball and cutter aren't too far off major league quality at the age of 18. Has really good stamina for a reliever and is incredible at holding on runners. Certainly looks like he could be an excellent pitcher. Out of the bullpen, his nickname Flamethrower. He does have an excellent fastball, and he's already throwing in the low to mid 90s. Certainly think he could be a good one, maybe a little early for a reliever, but if we think he's the best player out there, we've got the opportunity to make a run at him. And then there's also a couple of starting pitching prospects. Danny Black, also 18 years old. Like the fact that he's durable, certainly has the stamina and the hold runner ability to start. The concern is that he could be a one-pitch pitcher when all is said and done. You think his cutter is going to be major league quality, but we have questions about whether his slider is really going to be major league quality. And then the curve and the change both have a lot of work to do. If both the curve and the change develop to the extent that we think they could, he could be an incredible pitcher as a guy who throws in the mid-90s already with well above average stuff, above average movement, and potentially exceptional control. As I mentioned, he is durable, the right-handed starter. Certainly another guy to consider. And then Phil Mullen, another starting pitching prospect, also 18 years old, out of Long Island, New York. Ground ball pitcher, throws in the mid to low or low to mid 90s. Another guy who could be a 4-pitch guy, certainly looks like at a minimum he's a 3-pitch guy. Really good stamina, really good at holding on runners, potentially above average stuff, movement and control. A lefty. Certainly looks like Dizzy Mullen could be an interesting one as well. So I like all three of the pitching prospects. There's also a number of 3-star prospects that I'll spend some more time with offline. We'll kind of highlight Jim Coles here simply because it looks like he's got a great personality with high leadership, work ethic, and intelligence. A potential 4 to 5 pitch arsenal of good, solid major league pitches, has the stamina to be a starter. Not an exceptional guy coming out of Louisiana Tech, but looks like he's got a really high floor on him. And, at the very least should be a 5th starter and maybe could be a 3rd or a 4th starter if everything works out well. So definitely some interesting pitching prospects. We'll spend some more time on some of them. Take a look at the scouting director recommendations in general. He's going to have us go with a catcher who we haven't looked at yet. If we were to go with a pitcher, his recommendation is the starter, Danny Black. And if we were to go with a reliever, interestingly, he says if we were going to go to reliever, go with Dizzy Mullen, who looks like of the 3 starters that we talked about based on his profile and his stamina, looks to me like the one who is most guaranteed to be a starter at the major league level. So a little interesting that our scout looks at him as maybe a potential reliever. I figured he was going to say Wisniewski was the way to go, so kind of interesting that he did not. But should have some interesting options among the pitchers, whether we take one now or we wait a few more picks. Someone interesting is likely to be on the board. Turning to the batters, we know that our scout recommends we go with one of the four-star prospects out there. He recommended the catcher J.D. Bossler. Like the high loyalty and work ethic, like the durability, like that he's faced off against good competition and still hit 450, close to 500 throughout his high school career. Don't love the poor defense. Potentially really good contact hitter as a catcher. Don't know that this is a guy that I'm going to be totally bowled up on taking with the 33rd pick in the draft. He is a left-handed hitter, which is also an interesting feature for a catcher. Could work really well in a platoon potentially, but he's got a lot of work to do on his defense. And I don't know that this bat is so exceptional that I'd want to play him anywhere except catcher. I mean, it looks like at 6'1" with pretty pitiful infield ratings, he'd probably even struggle to be a useful first baseman. So I hope there's ultimately a better option among the position players than Bossler. Another catching prospect, Edgar Esquivel, 17-year-old, a bit better defensively, somewhat more balanced in terms of his potential hitting profile, but certainly not exceptional. Does look like he brings more to the table defensively, both as a potential first baseman, but also as a potential catcher, most importantly. Don't love him either. First baseman Alejandro Rivera out of Costa Rica. Not all that exciting a prospect to me. He can hit the ball out of the park, potentially should generate slightly above average number of walks, but not much defensively, not much on the base paths. A decent prospect, but not someone I'm salivating over. The last of the four-star prospects is the first baseman, Greg Stark, another guy who doesn't bring much to the table defensively. Does look like he could have really good home run power and a borderline exceptional eye, which is a positive feature to have. Not going to have a ton of gap power, but given that he doesn't have any speed anyways, doesn't really matter. If he could get that contact up to be an average and the avoid strikeouts up to average, could be an interesting offensive player, particularly given his durability. I'll be honest, though, I'm not in love with any of these four-star prospects. Greg Stark at 6'11" certainly has the reach to be an interesting first baseman, though. Think on an initial view among the four pitchers we looked at, definitely like those top four pitchers more than these top four hitting prospects. But we still have, looks like 7 3.5-star prospects that we'll take a quick look at here before we finish up the episode. Jesus Esquivel is a left fielder, really good speed, and looks like he's also pretty proficient potentially on the base paths. He's durable. He's a 21-year-old coming out of Missouri, college player. Not a ton of home run power and not the greatest eye in the world. But does look like he could be a pretty good contact hitter, not going to strike out a ton, acceptable defensively in the outfield. Mike Etheridge, 18-year-old center fielder. Another guy with exceptional speed, although his base running instincts don't seem as good as Esquivel's. He is also durable, looks like he's better defensively. A guy who can potentially also play in the infield as well as first or third. Another guy without much home run power or without much of an eye to draw walks, but does potentially have really good contact, gap power, and avoid strikeouts. Pee Wee Etheridge is a interesting prospect to me. Again, I'm not in love with any of these guys, but Etheridge certainly isn't the least favorite of these 6 position players that I've looked at. Second baseman Jeff Hallmark, a 22-year-old out of Texas. Looks like he could be a useful major league bat if he fully develops. Durable, facing great competition at UT. Kind of a man without a position in the infield, unfortunately. Doesn't really look like much of an outfielder. He could be he's also only 5'10", 170, so he's not even ideal for a first baseman. It looks like first and second are the positions he's played in the past. If his defense was a little better, that bat would be interesting for an infield prospect, especially one who's probably only a couple years away from being close to fully developed. But the defensive limitations concern me a bit. Chandler LeMay, another college prospect out of Wilmington University. Nothing defensively, poor work ethic. Another guy who could hit a few homers and draw a few walks. Going to strike out a lot, most likely. Last three guys that we're going to look at, another catcher, Andy Long, 18-year-old. Like the work ethic, pretty mediocre defensively. Looks like the bat could be useful for a catcher. Committed to UVA. Akatha Malapeti out of South Africa is a second baseman. Another guy who defensively has some limitations, but the bat for an infielder could be interesting. Can't really play the outfield, though, so at a high level, Malapeti is very similar to Jeff Hallmark, just not quite as far along in his development, being 4 years younger. And Dave McLaughlin, first baseman, another guy that I'm not incredibly excited about. I'll take a look at these two shortstops who are 3-star prospects also. Juan Acevedo, actually I like the durability with him, like that he's got decent range. Looks like he could be a useful-ish bat. And Alfredo Arellano, 21-year-old out of VCU. One of the more interesting gloves that we've seen, like the high work ethic. Looks like the bat could be borderline useful. So there's some interesting prospects for us to think about. Quite honestly, though, and this is not going to be a surprise for those of you who have watched me over the years, I'm somewhat more intrigued by the potential pitching prospects than the potential hitting prospects at first glance. But I'll be doing a lot more work offline before we start making some decisions in our next episode. If you've got any thoughts on where we should go, always helpful to hear them. It's been a big season for the Buffalo Wings in the majors thus far. And as I mentioned, with 3 of the next 7 picks in the draft, we should have a good opportunity to reload our minor league system a bit. And that's what we will focus on in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.